Today's episode we're going to be discussing cutting out and forming the front chair legs. The design we've chosen for our legs is a rhombus. We did look at making it a trapezoid shape rather than a rhombus, but decided that we like to go with the rhombus. These are the two front legs from our prototype chair, just so I can demonstrate to you what we're planning on doing with the actual legs here today. We're going to be putting in the mortises for the tenons on the rails for both the fronts and the sides of the chair into the front legs. The front rail has a long tenon on the top and a short tenon on the bottom, and that'll fit in there like that. The side rails have the long tenon on the bottom and the short one on the top, so that when they're fit all together inside the leg, you get the maximum length tenon possible and the maximum strength by the two pieces not overlapping with one another inside the chair. You don't have to angle anything or cut it off. They fit nicely together. We've set up our PantoRouter with the two standard templates that come with the PantoRouter that produce a tenon that's about 1 1/4 to 1 3/8 inches long, and using the 1/4 inch bit, you'll get a tenon that's 1/4 inch thick. You can get different settings based on the thickness of the diameter of the router bit and how long the tenon templates are that you use. We have them set up so that there's a 1/2 inch between the two up on the top, and the edge of each one, so that we can get it lined up perfectly, is 3 3/8 inch from the center. This is just our setting that we happen to use based on the height of each of our rails and where we wanted the tenons to come out. That produces this kind of a setup where the gap between is about the same distance. Each of these end up being 1 1/16 more than 1 1/4, and the thickness is 1/4 inch because that's what the router cuts out. You can set the depth to get the longer or shorter tenon on this gauge down here. Just lock this into place, and we bring this up to our material. This isn't clamped down and in place yet, but you bring the bit up to the material, and at the bottom here you can measure in how deep you want that plunge to go with the finished cut. For our longer cuts, we're setting it at 1 1/4 plus an extra 1/8 inch for the housing mortise, and 1 extra 1/16 more than that for a little bit of room for the glue. The shorter ones will set at a depth of 3/4 inch. For demonstration purposes, I'll make this first cut without using the collar around the outside. Deep on the bottom and shallow on the top. missed recording the process of doing the housing mortises in the legs, so we're going to give you an overview of how we did that. To begin with, I took the leg and I had the 2 mortises drilled in for receiving the tenons on the rail, and I fit those into the leg, and then took a knife and scored around so that I could see where that rail would be received into the leg, and that way I could make sure that when I go to mortise it for the housing mortise, then it won't be misaligned. So I put the leg on the table flat, lining it up with the center of the housing mortise lined up with the center of the table. And up here, we set up the template for the housing mortises according to the guide that's available on the PantoRouter website. There's measurements there that give you various measurements for, or ratios for, depending on whether you're using a 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, 1/2 inch bit, and also the size of follower you're going to be using. We're using a 1/4 inch bit because of the corners of the housing mortise. It's just a 1/4 inch roundover. It's not a bigger roundover that we would get out of a 3/8 inch bit or a 1/2 inch bit. And we're using the 10mm follower. Up here on the jig, I have a hole drilled in to the center of the template so that I can find exact center in my mortise as well. Then I use a centering jig by putting this in instead of the bit. This would be a smaller end, and this would come in to a point that's marked on my leg that marks the vertical point as well as the horizontal center of this housing mortise so that everything lines up just perfectly. 10mm follower, I can rest that on there, and with the marks that I had laid out, I brought this up to the edge to make sure that the bottom edge of my bit would be clearing that away, as well as in the topmost position that would clear away as well. And then on the edges, turning my bit so that it shows me what I'm clearing away, that I'm clearing just to that line, and also on the opposite end clearing away straight to that line. And then I just route it out with the PantoRouter and cleaned out the housing mortise. These housing mortises are set to a depth of bringing it in up to the top, and until it touches the wood. You set the depth stop for how far that's going to plunge in. It's 1/8 of an inch at the top, and the bottom is closer to 1/4, and it's all due to the angle of the wood. Our front legs are going to need a little bit more shaping. They still have some pretty sharp edges to them, so we'll be taking those off and then shaping the bottom leg to a traditional shape that Greenes happen to use in their designs. This is a template I've made for shaping the bottom of the front legs, and it's about 1.5 inches up is where the curve starts. It's just a gentle curve, and if you were to go straight in from the square edge, this is only 5/16 of an inch from here to here, with this gentle curve coming up on either side. I've made it so that it fits on the legs so that I get a uniform distance, and the bottom of my legs will always end up the same width. So I line this up with the edges and just draw in on each side where that should go. And you can see the lines that I've drawn in that are shaping the bottom of the legs all in towards the bottom end. And that's the same shape that we've used on our table, the exact same curve. So it's matching all of that. And we'll sand all this down as well. In shaping the top parts of the legs, first we took a test piece, ran it on the belt sander, decided we didn't quite like the unevenness and unpredictableness of that shape. So we did a test piece first, and then we went to work on the actual pieces. Came up with this as a slightly pillow design. To get the round over on the top of the leg, rather than using just a 1/4 inch round over bit on each of the edges, which would produce a real mechanical look, I want a nice soft pillowed effect. I'm measuring down 1/8 of an inch from each edge. Then I take my Lee Nielsen block plane, knock off each of these edges, and then that was a little extreme. This is a test piece. Scrape this off down to the line. On each of the sides. Knocking these corners off not only prevents tear out, but it also helps me get this gradual curve over on the top of the leg. So just until the line is cleared away, and a couple more passes here to help get that round over edge so that it ends up being fairly rounded over there. Rather than having a very sharp edge to that gets rounded over with the tool or with a round over bit or running across a router or something like that, doing it by hand gives a much more organic feel to it, allows the pillowing on the corners to be done correctly, where we take a little bit of sandpaper and curve over the edge of this just ever so slightly so that it's not a sharp point on any of these. It's almost an arc to each of the shapes as it goes across the edge of those. Then the top ends up quite smooth, and it's a nice little pillow, very smooth to the touch, good feel, good look. 80 grit sandpaper. And by following the line here, I can see if I'm sanding off too much to one side or not very easily as I go, and where it might need a little bit more attention. Because I'm on the top of the piece, the grain of this actually is running this direction rather than the up and down here, so it's not such a big deal that I'm doing this part not with the grain of the wood as I sand. I do want to hit this top part as well as I go down to it. The idea is that generally as I sand around to the top, it'll join in the center of the piece. Okay, so that's the general shape that I've got around the top edge. So you can see a little bit of the profile there that I've got a little rounded over. That shows the profile pretty well, with a little bit of pillowing on the top. That's the general rough shape that I'm after. A little bit more angling here. It's a bit of a sharp angle right in through here, and that'll go away to be more of a smooth, rounded over top. So that's a little bit closer to what I'm after, is just a really nice rounded over top edge to the leg. So then I'll go with the next step up at 100 degree or 100 grit. Go to the 120 grit. Doesn't take much to knock those corners down. And this would be my 150. Start on the side. And finishing off with the 3 320. And here we have our finished sanding down process for the shaping of the top of the leg. I do prefer to do this after I have the edges curved over and the face is sanded, because this is the final thing. That way I can ensure that this blends in nicely, but I can also blend in these corners as I do the side shaping as well.